Hello, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and you are watching Tom Talks Rubbish. It's the place for interviews, wrestling reviews, and so much more.
Sure, you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. I highly recommend you subscribe here first.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Michael Hamflett from WhatCulture. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate being on.
So if we take this back, obviously you've done a lot of work for WhatCulture Wrestling, if I'm right. So when did you become a wrestling fan?
Oh, God. I think when everything else was still in black and white, back when all of these buildings were still all fields, pretty much. So certainly in the wrestling media community, it feels like my story goes back a long way. There was two waves of huge popularity, I guess, for the WWF as it was then. In 1990-ish, 89, 90, when they first did their show over here in London somewhere, I forget where it was, Earl's Court maybe, and then again in 91, 92, which obviously led to Wembley Stadium. Mine was that very first one. I was about 5, just turning 6 maybe, and Hulk Hogan was feuding with the Ultimate Warrior ahead of WrestleMania 6, and my uncle was one of the very few people to have Sky. And it was one of those, and I'm sure lots of people have this story with wrestling. I remember just being sat on his floor and not being able to stop looking at it. Hogan and the Warrior, these giant men with giant bright colours, as it was. I think they were both in yellow. I've got this fairly vivid recollection of the Royal Rumble that year when they first came together. And these giant men in bright, vibrant colours, and I could not stop looking at it. And we moved house not long after that and didn't live near this uncle that had Sky Television, but he very kindly sent me tapes, and it was just this fix. When this tape came through the post, he would record, I don't know, maybe 3 hours, whatever it was, the weekly TV at the time, and I would just devour it and watch it again and watch it again and watch it again. And I've asked my parents in the years since, and they said, well, you just didn't watch anything else from then on. There was no other kids TV you were interested in. There were no other toys you wanted. It was just wrestling. So it was, shout out to my Uncle Bob. It was his video that would come through the post every few weeks, and that would just be me set for that period of time. I would just watch that video, wear it out, watch the next one, wear it out. And yeah, that was 31 years ago, which is a lifetime, and it never stopped being wrestling from then.
For the kids that don't understand, it was hard back in the day, even when I was a bit younger. Like, the kids today won't know. They were spoiled. They're spoiled with the WWE Network and YouTube and stuff like that. I even remember, like, tape trading WrestleMania 21.
Yeah, like as recent to us, I guess, as WrestleMania 21, and it was still a tape trading thing. It's the network the network, YouTube, access to everything online. It's there's a lot of people, I guess, that I've sort of spoken to in the past that are similar age to me that spent years just trying to get their hands on as much as they can and then hoovering up everything on video. And I had this, I used to go to car boot sales when I was a kid, and I had this at the time when I was younger at home, a bedroom that was just full of videos, thinking, well, once I've got this collection, I'll be set. And then videos,
then something else would come out, I imagine, and you'd be like, yeah, I need that now.
Yeah, I had a video VCR to DVD converter, and I was making a DVD collection. I was one of them people that had the sleeves full of all the discs and thinking, right, well, this is me. I'm going to be set for this for life. And then the network comes along, and suddenly it's at the push of a button. And then, funnily enough, like they're in a loft somewhere, the boxes of DVDs, when there was the recent discussion about Peacock taking the network and a lot of the things disappearing, and apparently the transfer hasn't been quite smooth for some of our American friends. And I'm sort of dreading the day that we get that transfer in the UK.
Because isn't Peacock launching in this country soon as well?
Yeah, we're told it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I'm thinking, am I going to have to get up in the loft and get those DVD sleeves back down if I want to see the show as I remember it versus the 2 hour version that might appear on Peacock, or the ones that might just disappear? I don't know. So that might be a reward for the fastidious amongst us that were making endless copies at the time. But yeah, I cannot tell you how many times I must have bought, rewatched old shows only for this network to launch in 2014 that had everything I could want at the push of a button. It's quite remarkable.
What is your most, I guess, prized possession, as in DVD wise, or
DVD wise?
memorabilia wise? No, not memorabilia. Like show that you've got. What is your most prized possession?
Oh man, memorabilia would be a different thing because there is one piece of merchandise that I value very much. But in terms of shows, that's a real tough one. I would say there was the video of, and it just took a long time to get it, the old Silvervision fully boxed cassette of SummerSlam '88. And what I found so fascinating about that as a child, because like I say, I would have been maybe 5-6 years old in 1990s. This show's already 2 years old. The rating on it was a 15. And I could not wait to see this video, this show, because it was a 15. I'm talking about when I was under the age of 15. I was thinking, well, what, if you would, again, I'm probably aging myself and dating myself. Anyone that remembers Blockbusters, maybe not video shops, but Blockbusters, and the section of horror, for example, where you would see the covers or the 18 rating and the curiosity of what might be on these tapes. When I got my hands on the Silvervision version with the 15 on, and it was all because, well, two things.
Miss Elizabeth's skirt, weren't it?
She took off her skirt in the main event and was wearing, a bikini that by Attitude Era standards, she would have been booed out of the building for. And Brutus Beefcake getting cut open with Outlaw Ron Bass's spur, that they put a huge red X across the screen. It said censored, but every now and then his head moved and you could see a bit of blood. Yeah. And I just felt like I'd acquired a video nasty. I can picture picking it up at a car book for £1 and thinking, am I going to get this for £1? I feel like I needed to run away from the stall because I felt like I was robbing the guy blind because it was just gold dust in my hand. And it's just, this is a very nerdy, I don't think I've ever admitted this before, but the videos sadly went to VHS heaven. However, I kept every cover in a plastic wallet, and I've got them in a file upstairs because I just think the covers of the VCRs were so stunning. And obviously you had the wide spines and you couldn't replicate them for DVDs. I've got them all lovingly stored in plastic wallets upstairs.
That's really cool, by the way. And with the network and YouTube and stuff like that, do you think there's a lost art or a lost connection with being a wrestling fan?
I think it's maybe, I'm not so sure it's as beholden to fans anymore to watch and rewatch. And I think that's perhaps the difference when there was less available content. Definitely. Wrestling has become, and I understand it, wrestling's become a commodity as content, whereas it was, and I really don't want to be old man yells at cloud because there's so many positives to that. But it certainly was, you felt closer to the art form because you only had that as this very static item, whereas it just sort of exists as a bit of data online and you watch it and then it's gone. And look, and I say that about, that's not just exclusive to WWE, that could be AEW, that could be your favorite indie show. There is so much that you really have to make the time to rewatch something. Once you've seen it once, it's like wrestling's telling you, well, on to the next one. As we're recording, there's just been an AEW pay-per-view. We're just coming up on a WWE,
which we're going to talk about, if that's okay. If we can.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. But we're already going to be, like today, we're already being told what the next television card is. There's a Survivor Series coming up. It's just, you're always on to the next one. And it's thus for maybe isolated matches or isolated stories. It's really hard to imagine that you'd make 3 to 4 hours of your time to rewatch something end to end. And it's stuff from my past, I have jokes at WhatCulture that I'm the encyclopedia. Part of that is because I would just watch shows over and over again. I was revising without realizing that stuff was just going in. And I just think it's so much harder to make the time. If you, off the top of my head, if I was going to say, right, tonight I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch Money in the Bank 2018. Like, my wrestling brain might be able to pull moments from that show, but it's hard to imagine going back and watching it end to end.
Ronda Rousey's cash-in? No, Alexa Bliss's cash-in, sorry.
Yeah, decking Ronda with the briefcase was exactly one of the things my brain went to.
Push Alexa.
Shout out to Adam Wilborn, who has the same problem as you on our podcast. But like, exactly that. Little Miss Bliss, we'll call her for the benefit of your Alexa. Cashing in is one of those things. It's a standout moment, but whatever the match was maybe before that, I would need to go and double check the wiki or whatever. And it's just,
I want to say it was Nia versus Ronda, but
oh well, yes, sorry, yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, I think as an experience, definitely. I think it's harder to imagine engaging as we may be used to such an intricate detail. I think only certain shows will reward that now, and you kind of have to move with the product as quick as it moves.
What shows do you think, since we'll call it the digital era, but you know what I mean? Since the digital era, have rewarded fans up to a rewatch, maybe?
I mean, this is recency bias, but All Out 2021.
Oh yeah,
special. You know, there was a kind of. I remember the conversation the next day, and again, you know, we're talking. It's recency bias, I suppose, but everybody immediately raced to almost ask the question, where does this stack up against WrestleMania 17, which felt like the last transcendent show of such a standard, or I guess for a lot of AEW fans, certainly Double or Nothing 2019. Again, that same kind of, is it like an energy and a vibe, and you want to relive. Again, not to sound like AEW centric, but All In is a show that I've definitely rewatched in full because it was just so powerful, and you could feel that change was in the air at All In 2018, and we maybe didn't know AEW was a set of initials, but we could see this was like a landmark moment for North American wrestling. WWE is trickier. I would say, again, I was there, which maybe changes it, and it's long, but WrestleMania 35 holds a lot of love. And to more specific, this maybe is where WWE mastered it, the takeovers. Up until a little while ago, I was in 2020, I was feeling quite sad with the state of NXT, and I wanted to fall in love with the letters all over again. So I started watching, and I need to go back to this on Twitter, but I started chronicling every takeover from the very beginning, rewatching them and re-enjoying them. And even when some of them don't fly as high as others, they're about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and you'll struggle to find a more polished wrestling pay-per-view than the golden era of NXT TakeOver. It's just such a luxurious, warm cuddle of a watch. There's so little fat on these shows. And yeah, the TakeOver archive on the network is there to be protected and treasured. It's magic.
One that I will say, maybe you have watched this, maybe you haven't by this point, but is TakeOver Toronto. Very underrated TakeOver in my opinion. Because you had the Mickie James Asuka match.
Wow, brilliant
match. Absolutely love that one.
Yeah.
And the Revival DIY in 2 out of 3
that was the title change where they're holding hands so they don't tap, and then they come with that's an all, like, in a series of, like, the TakeOver brand maybe until the last year or so was this prestigious protected thing, and in a series is like elite tier as TakeOver, that's probably the top 2 or 3 of the bunch, isn't it? Dallas TakeOver Dallas holds a really special place in my heart as well.
I'm guessing you were there.
I wasn't, you know. I would have loved to have been there. I know some people. Adam Nicholas of WhatCulture and of Podcast Horseman was in Dallas for WrestleMania 32 and for TakeOver Dallas. But I remember, I love that feeling that a wrestling show gives you, that you can picture yourself watching it. You kind of, it lifts you out of body, and you're kind of floating over yourself watching it. And TakeOver Dallas was there. I was there for TakeOver New York, which like spiritually sort of feels like a season. It feels like a season finale for Triple H's NXT, because
it was like years ago as well.
It does, doesn't it, man? It does. The war would start soon after. The rosters would change. What NXT meant, I guess, would change, and that was just crystallized perfection of what they could do at the time.
So, you spoke about some of your favorite pay-per-views and stuff, but what is your weekly consumption of wrestling like nowadays?
Oh, so a lot of it, the majority of it, in truth, is for work. But I love that. I would certainly wouldn't change that. And in reality, my consumption would probably be quite similar if I wasn't writing or talking about it. So starting from a Monday, it will be Monday Night Raw, obviously. Tuesday will be NXT 2.0. Wednesday will be Dynamite. Thursday, I guess, currently, unless I'm forgetting something, would be
Impact?
Well, Thursday, actually. Well, I'm not a regular Impact viewer. I'm a kind of a situational Impact viewer. So I guess I don't think casual fan is such a thing anymore. But if I was a casual fan of everything, it would be of Impact, because I'm a bit of a I'm a bit of a sucker for the stars or the moments. So I'll dip in if they're like, as recently Kenny Omega, for example, when he was doing his belt collect stuff, I will dip in there. Or if there's a match that has generated talking points, if it's been taped, I will try and track it down. Minoru Suzuki was making headlines recently, so I was there for him. But often there's, say, like a Being the Elite or Sammy's vlog or something that's just generating a bit of conversation. Thursday feels like it's a bit of a break for something like that. Friday now is Rampage, obviously. Saturday is when I will watch SmackDown and Rampage, typically because of the Friday night airing in the US.
Very, very late.
Saturday. Yeah, you know how that is. If you're going to stay up late, it's very late. And Dynamite, I will try and stay up very late for, but Rampage is those extra couple of hours.
To peel the curtain back, if I'm not as animated in this interview, I did it for Full Gear over the weekend. Very bad idea.
Same, man. It's just, but I'll be honest, like, it's, as part of the job, it's like, it's an honor and a privilege to get to talk at length about these shows. And do it as our job and get together with the guys and do the recordings. So I love, like, it can be tiring sometimes to get up that early to make sure that I've got the shows watched before work, but I wouldn't change it. And you can gimmick it a little bit. You know, you can go into that 1.5 speed dial sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's a big help. But ultimately, it's that viewing schedule of trying to get everything packed in before work. It's a part of the job, but the job itself is often just a total privilege. So I don't mind that.
To peel the curtain back, what is it that the people can mainly find you on for WhatCulture? It's a podcast. Yeah,
so I guess for anybody watching your channel that may not know who this square-faced guy that you're talking to is, I work for WhatCulture, and our coverage is, of course, across audio with the podcasts, videos with our lists, and our why things with the likes of Simon Miller, and our written content on the website at whatculture.com/WWE. So I guess people will know me predominantly from the podcasts that I work on with my fellow daddy boy, Michael Sidgwick and Adam Wilborn. And really, those podcasts are, as best we can, a full review menu for the wrestling week. The wrestling week I've just described, pretty much. We'll try and cover AEW and WWE as the preeminent North American wrestling shows. New Japan was part of our coverage until it kind of that felt itself falling away from the mainstream conversation. There's an obligation, I guess, to cover what is going to generate the most interest. So likewise, Impact will occasionally, you know, like it would be all the more awesome if we could just cover everything. But it's like everything else, and I'm sure, like a lot of other people you've spoken to, you were driven as much by where the interest is. So when there's something on Impact that has got everybody talking, it would be folly of us not to discuss it and report upon it and offer opinions on it. So we do that. We also do, as well as the weekly review podcasts, we do roundtables and we do questions answered and things like that. So we just try and offer the broadest, at least what we're available to cover, the broadest sort of representation of all the wrestling that the most people are likely to watch. We'll try and watch that, cover it, talk about it in a roundtable setting. It's a lot of fun. We try and like have a good laugh with it. We try and keep it lighthearted. There are sometimes serious topics that we try and cover as and when they come up. And obviously we just try and offer analysis. There's a lot of places you can go for your wrestling analysis. So we just try as best as we can to offer the best we can.
What is it that you feel like makes the WhatCulture, I'll call it the WhatCulture podcast, because that's what it is. I don't know why I was trying to call it something else. But what is it that you feel like makes the WhatCulture podcast's analysis different from the other wrestling podcasts and analysis? I don't know if that's a word.
It'll do for me. I don't know, because I feel uncomfortable
from the other ones that are out there, basically.
I suppose this would involve us. like me trying to put us over, and I always get uncomfortable with that because I just think it's a treat for me as a lifelong a treat as a lifelong wrestling fan to be able to do it. But I genuinely believe that, again, if I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit, I like to think myself and Sidgwick as the Dadley boys. We bounce off each other really well, but we see wrestling in different ways in a very complementary fashion. So we've watched it for virtually the same amount of time, and our analysis is rooted in just how much we've watched and how seriously we take it. I would imagine some people think we take it too seriously sometimes, but we care a great deal about it. And it's wrestling when it's done really well is there to present you with clues and treats and teases and Easter eggs and all this sort of stuff. And you want to pick apart that as much as possible because you've just watched it, and that's how our brains look at it. So we try and we try and articulate that on a podcast as best as we can. With Adam Wilborn, who is our host, for those that don't listen, that guy's a professional. That guy's an amazing professional. His background was in radio. So he pulls us back in when we go off on these crazy analytical tangents. He offers a bit of levity and humor. He's the funniest guy. And I think he extracts that from us as well. I think he finds the humor and the patter in myself and Sidgwick, and he lets us loose with it as long as possible. And then he just doles out some ridiculous crack of his own, and we get to bounce off that as well. So I'd like to think it's either one or the other. Sometimes it's like, when you see in television where people would slip a cake to a prisoner and it's got a file in so they can escape, they can file their way through the bars. I think we're the cake with the file, and it's up to our listeners to decide if the cake is the humor and the analysis is the file, or the analysis is the cake and the humor is the file. But I think we're sneaking one in with the other, and I guess listeners can decide which one's which. And we're just, it's amazing to see that we're number one in the British Wrestling Podcast chart, and it's amazing to see the engagement that we get with people on Twitter specifically, where we can have conversations with people that listen, and they're in such good faith, and they're just such nice chats that you get to have with people. And it's awesome that we've found our corner of the wrestling sphere of the people that like listening to us, and that we can have a chat with them in their ears. Because I listen to podcasts, and I like on my commute or if I'm out exercising or whatever, and I find that I feel in that time that I'm just in a conversation with people, and it gives me no greater pleasure to think that anyone listening to us thinks they're in this conversation with us, because we're thinking about our listener base, and we're thinking about what is going to entertain them and what they're maybe going to want to talk about and hear about and engage further with. And I get no greater joy than knowing that somebody might be listening that is getting the feeling that I get when I listen to podcasts I love.
I do, to peel the curtain back, because what I do when I listen is, if you guys are having a conversation, I sound a bit weird because I'll almost be talking along with you at times and replying to what you're saying.
That's awesome, man. I love hearing something like that, because I think podcasts are such a unique medium. They're a deeper cut than radio, but they're obviously super accessible, and there's loads of choice out there. And something like that means, especially coming from yourself as well with your channel, that means a great deal.
Thank you. So obviously you listed all the shows that you have to watch for work. What is the one show that you're like, ugh, I got to do this now? And then what is one that you're like, oh goody, it's that time of the, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I feel like the answers are going to be pretty predictable. I want to be really careful. I want to be really clear. I have had lots of, I got into this late. I got the job at WhatCulture when I was 31. I'd had 2 or 3 careers as an adult, a grown-ass man.
Actually, let's start there, if you don't mind. Shall we go, how did you get into WhatCulture then? Were you a fan beforehand?
I got to be honest, I didn't know a lot about WhatCulture. It was a lot of luck and chance. I was working in administration. I had a job. I live in the northeast of England, and I had a job in an office that I liked, and I just sort of thought that was going to be my job and my career for good. This sort of stuff, just to be an old man, I'll roll it back a little bit. When I got a journalism degree, but this is back in the early 2000s. I used to write on other websites, but always for free. People's blogs, people's websites. I took a great interest in writing. It was a passion. However, the wrestling media as we know it now just didn't exist. You had the pillars like your Dave Meltzers and your Wade Kellers and the like that have been holding that down for decades now. But there was no real paid work in wrestling. You could maybe run a wrestling website and maybe make a tiny bit of money from running a website. But if you were a writer, you were doing it out of love, you were doing it for free. Thousands and thousands of words a week that you would commit to it just to do it, just to enjoy it. And they didn't feel like an avenue in. So I graduated from university and thought, I'm going to have to get a job. I'm going to have to get a job that pays. I can't do this hobby and try and turn it into a job. So that was my mindset for 15 years. When did I start? 10 years, I guess. So I graduated in 2006 and I started at WhatCulture 10 years later.
In 2016, yeah?
In 2016, yeah. So like the media, the landscape had changed dramatically in ways that we never could have predicted between 2006 and 2016. So I was working in this office and all was good. And I had a friend, typically as a wrestling fan, and you might appreciate this, you find yourself somehow gravitating to others in your life that like wrestling. You don't know how you find each other, but you do. And there was a guy in my office who was called Chris, who I would talk with wrestling about. I owe Chris a great deal because he got me onto WhatCulture and he was showing me these list videos, and he'd seen a video that they'd put up about working for WhatCulture, and we used to just talk about it, and we were going through redundancy, which is quite unpleasant and quite nerve-wracking. And
quite
I just
common nowadays, I'll say that.
Yeah, and I've had a couple before in my past, and I certainly don't want to endure it again. But I was coming home and feeling really sad about the process and nervous. I had, and have 2 children and a mortgage and just, all those commitments and things. And writing for the first time in years, sitting and writing stuff down again was becoming a bit of a reprieve. And all of a sudden you put your hands together. There's an opportunity to write freelance for WhatCulture. And I think, why not? Why not? It's this thing that I didn't really know existed. It can all be done online now, which was, again, a new thing for me, that I could just like submit it online and maybe get published and maybe get paid a freelance fee for it. And I submitted a couple of pieces of work, and then I had a conversation with the boss at WhatCulture and sort of chanced my arm a little bit. I just said, I saw your video that you might be taking on people full time. Does that extend to writing? And I guess, fortunately, he liked what I'd done so far, and he interviewed me, and I got the job off that. It was it was on the strength of submission, and I since went on to find out that a couple of people at WhatCulture there at the time had edited my work or looked at it and had, put me forward and said, this guy has got potential, I guess. And that was that. And I couldn't believe that the job existed, let alone that I'd got it when I was potentially going to get made redundant from this other job. It's funny how life works in that way. I maybe would have never looked had I not been in this position. And
Gives with one hand, takes with the other, sort of thing.
Absolutely, indeed. It wasn't just a door closing and a window open. It was a bigger door. It was a door that felt forbidden. How appropriate does that feel? And suddenly I was in. Suddenly I was in, and that's been 5 years. So to circle back to that, I would never want to be seen to be complete. It's been 5 years. It felt like a dream job the day I was offered it. It still feels like a dream job today. And I would rather go into work and talk about Monday Night Raw than go into work and do my old job. However, Monday Night Raw at 3 hours, and a bad 3 hours a lot of the time, can be a hard old shift to analyze. It's not hard to watch because it's wrestling and I'm hardwired to watch wrestling, but it's hard to analyze because WWE drop stories. They let their characters down. They it's sometimes not, especially at the moment, not a great storytelling company, with exceptions.
No.
And when we're there to try and pick this 3 hour show apart from an analytical point of view, it can be difficult. It really can. Again, I want to credit Wilborn and Sidgwick with this, because me and Sidgwick can bounce things off each other. We'll just ping pong ball around. Wilborn can get us on point, or he can give us something to maybe work with. And the godsends, because 3 hours is a lot. Conversely, Dynamite's a joy. Dynamite is a joy. I'll watch that live every week. I'll have my bowl of cereal for the sugar high ready at 1 a.m. in the morning because I'm just so excited to see what goes down. And then I'll watch it. I'll not be able to sleep for half an hour, and I'll be up 2-3 hours later buzzing to talk about it, because typically 1-2 hour episode of Dynamite offers you 10 things to talk about. Your synapses are going like a fireworks display the next day. I'm sure, if you're a fan of it and you watch, you get that experience yourself. The next day, you're buzzing with possibilities that Dynamite offers. Raw is unfortunately currently the opposite.
I'll put it this way. So you've mentioned a lot about your family and stuff like that. How do you balance then staying up at like 1 a.m. to watch Dynamite to having a family balanced life? And if you don't want to go into that, if that's too personal, like I fully understand.
No, not at all. I think the answer, not to this sound like a cop-out, is that I don't really. I don't balance it. It falls apart, and I try and stick it back together with Blue Tack every week. My kids will be up between sort of 5:30 and 6, and my wife is super supportive, but she's got a job as well, and it becomes getting them ready for school and racing off to work, and it happens with bloodshot eyes on a Thursday because Dynamite. I'll be thinking I could go to bed now and try and watch Dynamite in the morning. But I'll just have one last scroll on Twitter and see the card and just get too excited again and think, oh, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to watch it. And Raw is kind of the same, but different because Raw will be that early morning start, trying to get up before the kids and get as much as it watched before they come downstairs. Because if they come downstairs and it's not time to get ready for school or have breakfast yet, it means I've got to put the telly on for them.
It'll be, Dad, can you do this? Or...
Yeah, so it's like I'm kind of like watching on my phone a little bit, trying to like watch this last segment of Raw while the kids are doing whatever they're doing. So that it's not so much a balance as it is a plate spinning exercise. SmackDown and Rampage are weekend things, and typically, there's things to do with the kids on the weekend or whatever. And it's a plate spinning act, but I honestly wouldn't change it. And the reality is, if I wasn't writing or talking about it or reporting on it or whatever, I would still be trying to find those gaps in my life to watch it anyway. So at least finding those gaps is made worthwhile by the time when I get into work. It becomes, well, now it's time to speak on it or to write about it or to think about it a bit more for work. At least when I've done all that, some of the bills are getting paid through the fact that I've done all that. So you kind of justify it in your head that way. So
like, I was just going to say, it's like, you get to watch this, but it's like, oh, I also make money out of this. So it's like, so this is my job. So I get to do almost my hobby for my job sort of thing.
I would never call watching Raw a problem, but even if I did, it's the nicest problem to have,
So you spoke about that and then like your favorite show and stuff, but what is like the one show that, no, I asked you that, ignore me. Like, what is the show that you're like, this is the one that with the podcast, I'll put it this way. What is the show that you feel like you guys can talk about the best?
It's at the moment it's got to be AEW, and that can be Dynamite and the pay-per-views or Rampage or whatever. But the thing with our podcast is, because I think we pride ourselves on analysis, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had with Raw, and I think we have a really good laugh with WWE coverage. We do, because sometimes the best way to engage with it is to just have a laugh at it, and just sort of pick the things you like, but otherwise have some fun with it. And the fun side is great, but the real love that we started as WWE fans or WCW fans, or whatever it was that really hooked you, that's born out of an earnest love for wrestling. And currently, AEW is best at capturing that earnest love. We have NXT 2.0 is this neon coloured amorphous.
I was just going to ask you about that, because as a big NXT originals, I'll put it that way, NXT it's 1.0 guy, what is your thoughts on NXT 2.0?
I put it like this. It's apples and oranges, but I love apples and I love oranges, and sometimes you're in the mood for apples and sometimes you're in the mood for oranges. I'm able to take how ridiculous 2.0 is and enjoy it as a very different proposition to what the best of the old black and gold brand was. And for all I loved that, for all I consider Triple H's 2014 to about 2016 booking run to be one of the greatest in wrestling history, I can enjoy this very silly thing on an entirely different level. But to go back to what I was saying about the analytical side, AEW, like Dynamite, on any given week, and even a bad Dynamite will do this, Dynamite will give you probably at least one great match, at least one great minor or major storyline payoff, at least one great minor or major storyline tease, and it'll probably leave you on the hook for next week's Dynamite.
Yeah.
And in terms of analysing things, that's a dream. That is an absolute dream. You want nothing more than a segment to give you so much to think about, so much to talk about. You want nothing more than a match to have a series of moments that you can't stop thinking about, or that you can't wait to praise the wrestlers involved. You know, I think there's a misconception in like a lot of people's take on the wrestling media that the joy is in burying things, and it's not. Yes, sometimes that you can have a bit of fun with it. I would love WWE to be the best version of itself. That's not speaking for anybody else. That's me personally. I would love WWE, the best version of itself, and us having to compete every week with what was the best show. It isn't. So instead, you kind of have to find the fun in the way that you want to find fun.
That's
Otherwise,
the fun and taking the mick out of it almost.
Sometimes, yeah. AEW, the fun is in how brilliant it is. If there's a bad Dynamite, or if there's a Dynamite segment that feels like it's let you down as a viewer, you almost dread having to pick it apart. You do. I really feel genuinely like we have good faith criticism of AEW in our conversations, but typically it's more positive than negative, and it's way more fun to talk about the thing you love in loving terms than not. It's
Yeah,
for me
I get
anyway.
you.
I'm speaking just myself there. Speaking just myself.
I get you. So, and I apologize for this because my interviews tend to jump all over the place.
No,
Like,
that's cool, man. That's fun.
we might go from one bit to like another bit and then back and then
No
vice
problem.
versa. So how did it then go from you were writing for WhatCulture and stuff like that to now, oh, they want to put me on cameras, maybe not the right term because it's podcast, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. That was so really that happened very organically. So I started about 6 months after Sidgwick, my fellow Dudley boy, Michael Sidgwick, and the two of us were, I guess, the prominent, like the regular staff writers. We had they were our primary role, I guess is what I'm saying, is that like we would be the ones that would provide probably the most regular written full-time content to the website. We've got like loads of awesome, great writers, and we've got tons that came through the office, loads that are on freelance. But I think like that was our primary thing. Everybody else had like other various jobs, whether it be lists or the news or things like that. But that was our thing. And then Wilborn wanted, I guess, from like conversations in the office, because whatever you think of us on the podcast as wrestling nerds, it's just the same at our desks as well. What we talk about is wrestling all day long. It's just our passion. Everything that you hear on the podcast is informed by the fact that we just love this stuff so much. So it's just all of our conversations, tennis balls back and forth all day. And I guess he heard that, and his background was in radio, and he had this big belief, and we did too. But he really thought he could do something with it about making our podcast more than just like a once a week catch up. It was he believed there was something in show reviews and like roundtable discussions and all the kind of stuff we offer now. And he was able, I guess, we did a few together. We used to have a paywall, and you could get extra content at WhatCulture. It was called WhatCulture Extra.
WhatCulture Extra, correct?
Yeah, and we kind of got our start on there, and there was a very small listenership because obviously it was a subscription model. But you could put it there, and it could just exist, really. It didn't matter if you didn't get high listeners, and it didn't matter if you didn't get particularly high turnover, but we got a core listener base. And then over time, that went away for a little while, but then over time, there was, I guess, calls for us to, it'd be lovely to have the Dudley boys back on doing reviews, and it'd be nice to get Wilborn and Dudley's together for this and this. So that kind of came back. And then it snowballed a little bit. We were doing it, and we used to do things like if you go back, they'll be in the archives somewhere, but the Raw and SmackDown review was one podcast, and it was very much a bullet point list of things. And then there was people gradually asking for more details, and I guess the listener figures were enough that our bosses were happy for us to expand upon them, and it grew very organically to the point where the podcasts almost took over the dominant part of our day compared to the writing. We still do contribute lists and editorials that then become videos or become fodder for videos, but the podcast became such a huge part of our day because there's so much wrestling now to review, and thus there's so many podcasts to record. And the more we were doing, the better the numbers were, and the better the numbers were, the more reach we got, and you go up charts, and you build subscribers, and you find yourself having more and more conversations with people on Twitter, and it felt extremely organic. And I guess if it started in late 2017 on WhatCulture Extra, we're probably just coming up on 4 years now where we've done these sort of things. And it honestly feels like it's never been, I don't want to say bigger, but I guess it is because of where we currently are. It's never felt more connected with the audience that we've got, and it doesn't feel like we've yet even hit the ceiling of what we can do with it. It's awesome what we do, and yet if there was a way that we could do more, I would, because I just love it that much. I would never want to spam our subscribers and make them feel like they're getting too much of us or all that kind of thing. But as much as we do, I still feel like it'd be awesome to do even more, because it's just such a fun element of the job.
Is there one show that you don't currently review that you're like, oh, I wish if we had time we could do this?
I guess it would be, I don't know. Like there are certainly times when Impact is hot where you just think, oh, that would be great to cover that. I would love, but again, this becomes a time thing. I would love if there was A, an audience for it, and B, a window for us to do it, to have like an indie wrap up in terms of like the current stuff. If you're asking about a show now, maybe not one show, but for example, when like GCW put on some awesome stuff with Matt Cardona and Nick Gage and John Moxley, and you know, it just feels like all of that stuff post-pandemic is finally coming back and it's finally bubbling back to the surface. And I can't pretend, I wouldn't sit here and lie and say I'm a super fan, but things penetrate the bubble on Twitter or on Reddit or things like that. And then you go back and watch and it's awesome. And it just feels like the coolest stuff. But I appreciate that itself is quite a niche thing, and we cater to the biggest in the mainstream. But a wrap up of that would be lovely. And because I'm an old head, if we were given the freedom, it's not so much a show airing now, but if we were given the time in our working week to set aside 3 hours to do maybe like a viewer request old show, or something that we wanted to talk about that was relevant to, you know, say if AEW was coming up on an anniversary and it was like, well, let's go back and do Double or Nothing 2019 and see where everybody's at now. It's retro content, but so as a result, it's probably for maybe less listeners than our weekly cycle of listeners. But if that space existed, as somebody that just loves his old stuff, that would be something I'd dive into head first as well.
That all sounds cool. So like
that's good. I appreciate that.
That all sounds really cool. I'm not gonna lie. So like, as someone that was predominantly in the writing side, did you have a desire to do on camera stuff, or was it like a young rabbit in the headlights when you were asked, sort of thing?
Oh man, I still feel like a young rabbit in the headlights when the camera's on me now. I wouldn't say I had a desire. I loved and love writing. I guess it was the passion when I was younger. Again, when sort of video content didn't exist. Dave Meltzer was, with the exception of a few rare television appearances, was words on a screen to me, was words on a newsletter, a physical newsletter when I was younger, and then words on a screen to me. Every writer was words on a screen, and that was enough. They became personalities in my mind. And I always sort of imagined that if you ever got to the privilege of being a paid wrestling writer, that was part of what came with it. And then I kind of came into this world that was so video heavy, and now I guess audio heavy with podcasts. Podcasts are nicer because you've not got that, you're not looking at the red light. There might be a record button, but you're not looking down the lens at a red light. And I love the roundtables that we get to film every now and then. Again, the pandemic has made it so that we're not necessarily always all in the studio. And I would like to think one day we'll be back there all the time. I know that people seemed at least to enjoy the three of us round the table and talking it up about whatever the latest topic was. There's a comfort zone to that because Wilborn kind of looks after us a little bit. He's the dad to the Dadleys. He's the dad to the Dadleys. You were saying,
like, if Wilborn wasn't on it, and I mean this in a positive way, but like you and Sidgwick, his name is very hard to say, I do apologize, would descend into chaos.
Oh, it would be one version of chaos. It goes back to the cake and the file. It would either be humor chaos or analytical chaos, but it would just, he would keep us on track. The list videos, our presenters have, like, in my opinion, one of the hardest jobs, probably and the editors, I guess, the people that go into making the list videos that you might watch, the face to camera videos where they're talking about an individual piece. That is such a skill. And I've got the most admiration for the guy. Like, I will often sometimes write the list that then they will turn into their own words or write the editorial, but like talking to a camera and making it look so seamless and having all this charisma. And like, I think it's so incredible. And I've got like such admiration for those guys that do the videos across all our coverage as well, not just the wrestling one. You know, I recommend you go, I think our film analysis and our gaming analysis, I will watch. I'm a very, very casual gamer, but if there's a big release that I'm able to get in on, I'll go and watch the guys, Scott or Josh, and I'll catch them on the gaming section. Same as in the films. I'll go and see what maybe like Amy is saying about films. And I'm missing hundreds of names out there, but like they're all great. And like the editing, the standard of the editing of our videos is just exceptional. The editors rarely get a shout out save for their name in the credits at the end, but the stuff they do is brilliant. That is a world that when I get to do it, I feel like I'm a special guest in it. I feel like I think it's called imposter syndrome. Where you think,
definitely.
What if somebody finds out that I'm not at all equipped to do this? I love the opportunity once in a while, but I think that's a series of skills that it takes a long time to learn, and these guys make it look easy.
I definitely suffer from imposter syndrome. Like when you said yes, it was
No,
wait, really? Like he said yes.
Oh no, man, absolutely.
Cool.
I couldn't do what you're doing now. I couldn't do what you're doing now. Putting an interview together like this, you know.
This is cool. And then like I definitely suffer from, are people watching for me as an interviewer, or are they watching because of my guest? And don't get me wrong, it's all about my guest. So I want them to watch for my guest. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
I rambled there for a little while.
No, but you know, this is your channel, this is your space on YouTube. And I, again, like to kind of relate it to something, a media that I consume in the way of podcasts. There are lots of interview podcasts out there, and there are lots of similar names that you see on similar shows, but you're going to pick the one whose host you like the most, because you're going to want to get that consistency from them every week. So absolutely, the people that are watching your videos, fair enough, they might pop in for guests, but they're going to be here predominantly for the questions you ask. These interviews, I think that, again, it's another skill. We've got like a couple of people on our channel that do the most of the interviews, a bit like what you're doing now. And I think that's an impressive skill. I got a degree. I went to journalism for that. I got a degree in journalism, and I don't think I could do these interviews as well as the likes of yourself and some of the other interviews you see online do. That in itself is a pretty impressive skill.
To relate to you as well. And I appreciate all them kind compliments, by the way.
Oh, that's okay.
What was I going to say? I've actually got, what is it called when you went to college for something, but you didn't go to uni? Qualification?
Qualifications like MVQs or A levels or what?
I've got, I think it's an MBQ. I need to look in my folder in media, actually.
Oh yeah, cool. And
that's how I sort of fell into doing this. Was like, I want to talk to cool people. But anyway, to go back to your good self. So like we were talking about how, is there something you have to do to prepare your voice to be on camera, or to prepare yourself to be on camera if you're still, in your own words, terrified?
I behind the curtain stuff, I'm hugely paranoid to the point where I could do this right now, but I'm trying not to be vain. I'm hugely paranoid that the nervousness will show itself in the form of sweat on my head, and I'll be trying to keep that as dry as possible. If I was ever going to be on camera, the light was particularly bright, I would think, oh, he looks like he's sweating, he looks like he's nervous. My voice, I'm quite lucky. We're not, you see those documentaries on like trained singers and how they have to look after their voice. I'm quite lucky with my voice, but, and it's a pretty huge but, and anyone that's listened for long enough will know, either side of the pandemic, my favorite thing to do, other than like my favorite passion beyond watching wrestling, is live music. I love going to gigs, and I'm as big a mark for the bands. Oh yeah, man! Like I'm as big a mark for the bands as I am for the wrestling, and I'm that dork singing and screaming along. And then I think this is just something that's caught up to me in my advancing years. But those that will have listened to podcasts from time to time, when my voice sounds particularly hoarse or croaky, it's because I've forgotten to maybe control my enthusiasm the night before, and I just sound like I know the joke is I'm WhatCulture's oldest man. I think I advanced that age by about 10 to 20 years the next day after a gig, because the voice has just gone. I have tremendous admiration for the singers I watch that are going to another town the next night and are playing live, because my voice just singing along with them is shot. And I hear that on the podcast sometimes, and it's made me realize that, well, it's a part of my job now to be professional and to try and keep my voice in check. So I have to, whenever I can, like make sure that the schedule is lighter the next day after the gig, or I pull back ever so slightly. I'll make sure to drink plenty of water or lemon tea or ginger tea to try and do whatever I can to get my vocal cords back in check.
I don't know whether you find this when you go to a gig though. You forget about the next day almost and just live in the moment,
Yeah.
and then it's like,
Oh yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's almost like you've heard the expression future Michael's problem or future
Yeah.
Tom's problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that sounds like a tomorrow problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a tomorrow problem, sort of thing. I'm just going to enjoy this now. Since you brought up gigs, I'm very curious to know favorite gig you've been to.
Oh, ever. It's between two that I've always struggled to really separate it from, and they're both just pretty much two of my favorite bands. I saw the Cribs. I've seen the Cribs and Block Party collectively probably around 30 to 40 times altogether. Like they're these two bands that I've just followed, like from their very earliest days when I was just old enough to start going to shows, and then just something that I've stuck with them throughout all their albums throughout all the years.
You know, I had a
15
panic then. And look, I was like, are we recording? And I was like, phew.
Oh man, I hate that feeling. That's another panic of a podcaster or a reviewer. But yeah, I saw the Cribs at Gorilla in which is a very small venue in Manchester. There was maybe 100 to 200 people there, and the movement of the crowd got me right to the barrier. And there's a great picture that one of the professional photographers got where you can just see my giant face hanging over the rail, just wrapped in just total euphoria. And I was so close, and I would never do this, but I was so close that I could have reached forward with my hand and strummed the guitar and ruined the entire gig. That was how close they were. And I didn't do it because I was just completely in awe of what I was watching. So that was one. And then about a year later, it was a Block Party gig at Alexandra Palace in London, where it was an anniversary of their first album, Silent Alarm, and they played the whole thing in full, in reverse, and they did an encore of just the deepest cuts of songs they hadn't played that I'd not seen for going on 20 years, 15 years maybe. And they played just my very favourite Block Party song. It's called Little Thoughts. It's not even on Spotify. It was a B-side at the time. You can find it on YouTube, Little Thoughts. And I hadn't seen them play it live for 14 years. And they played it, and I just completely lost it. A real welling up, tearful moment. Again, not thinking about tomorrow, Michael. And it was in London, so I did travel back. But those two gigs were in a year of each other, and I just couldn't believe my luck. These two very special nights. There's a lot more dating back to when I was younger as well, but those two from the last sort of 4 or 5 years really stick out.
That's really cool. But as we wrap this up, because we've been going about an hour, believe it or not.
I'm sorry, man. I rabbit on. I'm sorry.
No, man. And I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to go into a segment now that I like to call generic wrestling questions, sort of thing.
Okay, all right.
So, like, this will be, like, questions you've probably been asked before, but I'm going to be completely honest. This segment is just for me and my, do you know what I mean? And my fandom.
I'll do the "you deserve it" chant, man. That's absolutely fine.
Fair enough. Do you know what I mean? So, like, this is just for me. And if other people find it cool, like, that's cool. So, favorite match of all time?
Bret Hart versus Steve Austin, WrestleMania 13. I'd love to offer a deeper cut. It's an enormous match on, as they would call it, the biggest stage. But I just think I think North American wrestling, even as we know it today, owes everything to Bret Hart versus Steve Austin. It owes most things to Bret Hart, quite honestly, but it owes everything to that specific match. There's actually a list that I'll be looking to. I was working at WhatCulture when it was coming up on the 20th anniversary, and I'll be here for the 25th anniversary. So I'll be looking to maybe republish a list which reflects on, I think it was one of our 10s. So it was maybe 10 ways that Bret and Austin was the most important match in wrestling history. And I think there are fewer matches that you can break down detail by detail that hold up to such scrutiny as that. And everybody said it, and so they should. But the double turn changes everything. It is absolutely seismic. It is an earthquake certainly in WWE history, and in terms of the health and the eventual wealth of that company. And there is a feeling that you get when you're watching something where you know the world is changing. The wrestling world is changing at large. And that
we talked about in the beginning with like All In and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the God tier that you're shooting for. a wrestling Big Bang, and it's just, and it's and on its own. If you strip it of all of that context, it's still like a banger of all bangers. It's just a dream experience as a wrestling fan, and that's without all the significance, all the history, everything that comes with it. It's a masterpiece. You will get grief from a lot of people that if you say that wrestling is an art form, but I think wrestling, when done perfectly, is an art form. The rest
Yeah.
are artists. And Bret Hart, as I think probably in his own words, let alone everybody else's, he's Rembrandt. He's the greatest to ever do it, and that I think is his finest moment.
I think I know the answer based on the conversation that we just had, but favorite superstar of all time?
Bret the Hitman Hart, man. Like if the thing with Bret is, and I love I look at it as a timeline with Bret. So I got into wrestling because I wanted to look at giant dudes doing cool stuff. But when those giant dudes started to depart and you were left with, and it's always falls to Bret and Shawn, because it was those guys, but Bret Hart kind of got there first as the WWE champion and everything. I was 2 or 3 years into watching wrestling when Bret Hart was pushed as a singles guy. And whatever I loved about it in the first place, I was re-educated by Bret Hart. I was taught the magic of pro wrestling without even knowing I was sat in class. His work showed me how all of this was meant to be, because he was just like his work. Now, if you go back and watch it, save for the one match at WrestleMania 11 that he isolates as not being one that was very good with Bob Backlund, people ask on Twitter, and I'm honored that they do, what Bret match would you recommend to somebody wanting to get in? All of them, bar the Bob Backlund WrestleMania 11 match, because you'll just find something to look. He will show you.
That's not a bad match, by the way.
It's just his worst, isn't it? It's like he will show you the best working punch. He will show you the best selling of a body part. He will show you the best logical sports-based approach on how to beat the opponent in front of him. Big, small, fat, thin, technical-minded, flyer, whatever. His whole job when he went to work was to make this feel like the best possible emulation of a sport. And regardless of who your favorite wrestlers are, that's still at the root and branch of pro wrestling, and just nobody did it better. And what happened was, post Montreal, and then post, I would say maybe 2010, when he had his comeback and he had that match with Vince on the same night that Shawn Michaels had this incredible retirement with The Undertaker. Shawn had the second life. He had the second life as a fully fit working pro wrestler, and Bret couldn't do that. Bret, the stroke and the multiple battles with cancer that he had to retire and the retirement with the head injuries and the head traumas and stuff. He just didn't get that window that Shawn had. I think a lot of people started to overlook Bret, or just weren't watching closely enough, or were deeming him maybe a bit dry or a bit boring. And there has been this renaissance in the past 2 or 3 years where people have taken a proper look, or the wrestlers that are out there telling you, whether it be FTR, whether it be CM Punk, whether it be whoever, they are telling you, no, go back and watch Bret, because nobody did it better. That messaging has cut through, and Twitter in particular now is so effusive with its praise of Bret Hart. And I couldn't be happier, because as somebody that never stopped loving and never stopped believing in the Hitman, it's just awesome to see that he's celebrated in the way he is now.
As someone that obviously didn't grow up with Bret Hart, because I'm a baby in terms of wrestling, I'll be honest. Like, because I'm only 22. So, do you know what I mean? I didn't get him in his heyday, but I've gone back and watched a lot of his stuff and like, wow. Even his, which is probably the worst match of his career, because it's not a match. McMahon at 26, even that has a story to it, in the sense of, yes, he's hitting him with a chair, but if McMahon didn't go out the ring, the Hart Dynasty wouldn't have attacked him. So you get some sort of psychology in that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what as well about that run that goes unappreciated, because most people think of the Vince match, or the silly visual of him with the US title over his shoulder. He gets 2 minutes in the SummerSlam main event, and those punches on Heath Slater are just absolutely to die for. I can visualize him leathering Heath Slater, and he's gone through all of this, and those are still some of the best punches you'll see. And he's out there for 2 or 3 minutes, man. And he's still awesome.
Okay, so final generic question is favorite superstar currently, and then favorite pay-per-view of all time.
I don't want to. If my gut with favorite pay-per-view says WrestleMania 17, but I'm certain you'll get the answer off a lot of people as you interview, because it's this, again, we talk about landmarks and we talk about things like that. So I'll just try and cycle through the Rolodex and see if anything more recent springs to mind. Favorite current superstar, gun to head, because there's a lot. Gun to head is Bailey.
Really?
Bailey, yeah, Bailey. So takeover, I would say that Triple H's run between about 2014 and 2016 as the NXT booker, he might have saved my passion for pro wrestling, because I've never, a lot of fans will tell you about the times when they just went dark, or they stopped watching, or they took breaks.
I was just going to ask you that. Have you had a dark period?
I'm a psychopath, man. Never. It's been 31 uninterrupted years, and that's not unfortunately been the case for WWE's good creative. Like, there have been many years where, like, as the mainstream offering, WWE has not been the height of excellence, or certainly in the mid 2000s, TNA would get so close and take a giant leap forward and then take two even bigger leaps back and things like that. And 2013, the thumb on Daniel Bryan's head was getting a bit much to bear. And then CM Punk had cut a pipe bomb and said everything that might happen if he's not pushed. And then it did happen anyway. And yes, Bryan got his moment at WrestleMania 30, but you felt like, oh, they're never going to listen. They're never going to quite understand. And then you start questioning, you go, well, maybe I'm not there to be understood. Maybe they're just targeting different people now. And maybe WWE just isn't for me anymore. But NXT was so goddamn for me. And then that opened up a window to the independents. And I was late to New Japan, I think, relatively speaking. I think I only really got the New Japan bug in 2016. And a lot of people have been on that since about 2013, 14.
I want to say I was 2017 when Jericho.
Right, Jericho, right? Like, he came in for like Wrestle Kingdom in like late 2017, early 2018, didn't he? With that thing with Omega. But like, so I only got the bug for that because of Kenny Omega in 2016. So all that's a long way around saying that specific period of NXT, I hold such a fond place in my heart. But not just that, women's wrestling specifically. And I wish I could say that I watched more Stardom or I watched more independent women's wrestling, but I'm stuck with what I get from the mainstream offering. And NXT's women's division, like, every takeover match was an improvement on the last one from 2014 through to 2015. And I will say that after Austin Bret at WrestleMania 13, I think the second best WWE match ever is Sasha and Bailey at TakeOver Brooklyn. That is, to me, like another work of art, another earthquake, really, in terms of the doors it opened up, the realization of this idea that needed to blossom into that match specifically, and everything that followed for the time when the women's revolution wasn't just a figure of speech and you could actually witness it occurring. That was, and kind of continues to be, good women's wrestling is still my favorite wrestling. Sasha and Bailey in 2020 somehow crafted like a 9-10 month storyline in a company that can
during a pandemic as well.
In a pandemic, no less, that can barely pay attention to things week to week. And they did that. And I just, like, my heart swelled for their ability to do that under circumstances that just do not like manage these kind of angles. And Bailey particularly came of age as a performer, but really found this new version of herself as a heel in that run, and then was just cruelly robbed of a WrestleMania match and cruelly robbed of crowds by getting injured like weeks before the crowds came back. Like, she did all that in the pandemic.
Didn't she do her shoulder in? Like
she's recovering now from something. Yeah, it's either you see like rehab footage of her leg as well, and it's just, she's not had this crowd yet. Just for everything she did in the pandemic, she's not had the crowds. And
do you reckon she'll come back as a baby?
There's a chance. There's a chance, because as like she became her act was so infectious in the pandemic that I feel like there's a chance that people will just want her back so much. And I've said this before. It's a chat for another interview or another podcast about AEW's women's division and the pros and the cons and things getting right, the things they're not. Any one of the horsewomen would be an unbelievable get for the AEW women's division. Like, the higher of all hires would be to get one of those horsewomen and what they can offer, not just in terms of in-ring, but in terms of star power. On the surface, Bailey maybe looks like she offers the least in terms of the star power, but the advancement that virtually everybody on that women's roster would get from working with Bailey would just pull that division leaps forward. It's basically what you get now with Serena Deeb, but you would get it even more so with
Now
Bailey.
you've made me want to see Serena versus Bailey.
Oh yeah, man, who wouldn't? Like that's a WWE AEW dream match as it stands. But Bailey's got this, like, and I love Serena deeply, but she didn't have this WWE megastar sheen when she came in. Bailey would come in with all of that experience and all of that talent and ring excellence, but also star power. And I'll never ever give up on Bailey and Sasha Banks, because I don't think they ever gave up on helping elevate women's wrestling, and not just through their classic matches, but through their work as a tag team, through their fight to make those belts exist, through their matches they've had with others, trying to elevate everybody around them. And I don't say that with any knowledge of any backstage machinations. I just say it through what I've seen as a fan.
Yeah.
And I miss Bailey. And WWE makes it hard for you to miss talent. If anything, you're glad of talent getting a break and getting a breather. And AEW is the hottest product in the world right now, and I fizz with excitement at getting to see the likes of Adam Cole and Kenny Omega and Serena Deeb and Britt Baker and wrestlers like that.
Even Ruby Soho. I was like, this is going to be fun.
It's such an improbable stage that they're getting to shine on, and I love AEW for that. And CM Punk coming back has lit a fire in me that I didn't realize. There's a candle that I didn't realize burned as brightly as it did for CM Punk, and he's come back, and it's like he's another guy that's just like, I watch him and my heart just swells 10 sizes with how much I love it. But Bailey, man, like there's something about that 2015 match that did something, and like they took hold of me. And
were you there?
No, not like that was in Brooklyn in 2015. I was there for Takeover New York in Brooklyn at the same building in 2019.
Oh, right, my bad. I must have misunderstood.
I've seen Bailey work a couple of times, but just experiencing it through the screen, it was just, I don't know, it was something exciting. And on that, the other question was, if I wasn't going to recommend WrestleMania 17, it's a toss-up, and like I really couldn't be pushed on it. Brooklyn, London, Dallas as a 3 takeover in a row run is out of this world. Like you talk about spoiled. Like, I think you'll struggle to get a 3 takeover run. And somebody now, once they've watched this, will be like, well, what about this one? Because takeover's so hot for a while.
What about this? Brooklyn, New Orleans, Chicago. I think it's Brooklyn 3.
I mean, pretty great, man. So you've done it straight away there because the takeovers were so hot. You know what? And I'm forgetting that in between Brooklyn and London was Takeover Respect, which had the Iron Woman match. So make that a 4th runner. Like that 4 run of takeovers, that era. If I could say to somebody, switch on and watch Brooklyn, it will give you this idea of all the characters and get yourself through to Dallas with the weekly. Like that run of NXT, man. I got to attend. They toured in the UK in 2015. And I went to the Newcastle house show, and it was just one of the most incredible live experiences I've ever had. It was really, really special. And WWE, I think, for a lot of, the positive experiences you get on a house show, it's a lot for kids, and that's great. But as a fully grown adult by that time, buying a ticket, just a magic time.
Mm-hmm. So the final question that I always end my interviews on, and this might be harder for you to answer because, and I will commend you on your passion for wrestling. I will say that. One thing I am curious to know before I ask my final question is if that passion died for some sort of reason, would you be like, I can't work at WhatCulture anymore? I can't talk about wrestling and do wrestling if I'm not passionate about it. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. I would hate to think about that, really. I love working at WhatCulture. I love my job, and I think that in itself, being able to say I love my job, is one of the great things to aspire to in life. And and it's luck. Don't everyone can work hard, and everybody works really hard. And the narrative is always like, if you keep grinding and grinding, you'll get what you're after. That may be true for some people, but a lot of the time it takes luck, and a lot of the time it takes strange bouts of happenstance and things like that. And I would hate not to work at WhatCulture. It's a pun very much intended. It's a really great culture.
Sorry, that made me laugh.
It's all right. And I would try if wrestling sort of, I don't know, fell off in any way, I would want to just re-up. Like, I love television, and I love, to a lesser extent, like, I don't have a particular, like, as deep a knowledge with television and film, but I love it deeply. I do it's a cheap plug, but I do a podcast on the Netflix show BoJack Horseman with fellow WhatCulture staffer Adam Nicholas, and we do that, and I love that. We go deep on that once a week, and I would love to think that I would do it on, like, the television arm of the website, or I would maybe try and throw myself into, when the kids allow me, playing a few more games, so I could do some stuff with the gaming crew, or whatever it may be. So if for whatever reason my passion for wrestling dissolved, I would love to think I could apply it elsewhere, because yes, the passion is wrestling, but the passion increasingly has become the opportunity,
basically.
Yeah, the opportunity to talk and write and have a platform. Blessed with a platform, because Twitter gives us all one, but we're blessed to have one that allows us to, like, share it with so many other people. So I would love to think, if it wasn't that, it would be something in music, like there's things that I would love to be able to throw myself into if it couldn't be wrestling. I feel very lucky that it is wrestling.
Fair enough. To be honest, I think that's a really nice way to end it, but I will ask you my wrap-up question that I always end all my interviews on. With YouTube, with podcasting, with basically the internet, as we talked about at the beginning, we're all sort of gonna live forever in some ways. So what is one video, because have you appeared on camera for WhatCulture?
Yeah, we had a quite a run of the roundtables that got filmed. We had the video podcast went live. We've done a few in our new studios as the podcast group. I wouldn't say I'm a regular, but like when the podcasts make it on camera, typically I'm able to get my mug on there. That sort of cameos and special guests, I would say, I make on the channel.
Okay. So with YouTube, with podcasting, as I say, we're all sort of going to live forever. So what is one video, one podcast that if the people want to know your body of work, they should check out? And then what is one that you're like, don't watch that. I've grown a lot since then. Like, or like, don't, that's out of date, or you know what I'm trying to say.
I mean, it's one of them things. I probably first appeared on camera, I think 2018, maybe late 2017, I first appeared on camera, and don't watch them basically, because it's even if I've got that skill now, it's certainly not one I remotely had then. And it's not something I would want to sit and watch. It's probably awkward and super stilted. And I imagine that's the a lot of people would say that because it's a process and it just takes time. And
don't watch my first video.
Well, you throw yourself in a deep end and you just have to try and sink or swim. And you probably, other people might think that you're swimming, but you might watch it and think you're sinking. So I would say
I cringe.
One of those ones, man. Can I cheat a little bit? Can I cheat a little bit?
Yeah.
With can I take two? I'm really proud. I'd like to say I'm proud of all our wrestling podcasts, because I take an immense amount of pride in my work, and it's my biggest thing that I hope that always comes through. I never ever want people to think that
you can tell how passionate you are just in the fact that this interview was supposed to go an hour and we've gone nearly an hour 15.
Oh man, I'm sorry, I waffle,
bro. I wanted to go an hour for your sake. Like, I'm happy to talk. Do you know what I mean?
Well, so it's hard for me to remember the individual episodes that I'm particularly proud of. So I start thinking about shows. I'm very proud of we reviewed Revolution 2020, and it was just before the pandemic hit, obviously, and we were probably nervously trying to pretend that wasn't going to happen, and we were just treating it as a wrestling show. And that, of course, had Kenny Omega and Hangman Page versus the Young Bucks, which a lot of people consider the greatest tag match ever. And when the product is that good, it's the hardest to analyze, because you kind of just want to say, well, look at this, man. Just watch. You want to repeat
but
stuff
the
rather than
easiest to talk about, as we were saying earlier.
The easiest to talk about, but the hardest to add flavor to, because how can you improve upon something, or how can you add some dense analysis to something that is already so dense? And I'm just proud of how we tackled what I thought was this great show. I think there are various times when issues have come up in pro wrestling. I think we try and balance legally our conversations on things such as the speaking out movement, that require a completely different tone and it's hard to do, but I'm proud that we try and do it and we try and tackle it, because I think it's worthy, and I think it's as important, if not more so, than just generic wrestling coverage. And I like the pandemic was again, I can't isolate a show from that time, but the pandemic was as much for us to be able to come together and speak to our friends as it was for anybody listening that maybe couldn't speak to theirs, you know. So like doing these Zoom calls as we're doing now, were just so vital. So like from Revolution 2020 through to some of those early pandemic shows and tackling some of the stuff that happened in that very difficult summer, that's a little run that I don't go back and listen to it, but I think I would maybe once upon a time, like one day, maybe go back and think about it. The other thing, and I'm not just saying this for a plug, but we're coming to the end of it. Myself and Adam Nicholas have reviewed BoJack Horseman, and it is separate from wrestling. It's just a TV show that I love. But we're going to be finished soon, and it's
is it on WhatCulture? Is it a WhatCulture thing?
Well, we're hosted through the WhatCulture podcast hosting. So like we have a WhatCulture network of podcasts, and we're part of that, I guess. And it's just it's going to exist. It's funny when you said it's what made me think of it when you said when we're all long gone, the internet will allow things to exist. It will, like the show itself, just be this package. Wrestling never stops. It's the 52-week-a-year episodic TV show.
Yeah.
This has been a 6-season thing that we're shortly about to finish as we're recording this. It might be finished by the time this airs.
It goes out the 3rd week of December.
We might be nearly wrapped up, and I'll be sad to see that go, but it's just a thing. It's like something in a shoebox. It's there. I'd like to think it'll sit there on podcast platforms forever. And if 10 years from now, somebody watches BoJack Horseman. I'm watching Curb Your Enthusiasm in full for the first time. And Curb Your Enthusiasm started 10, 20 years ago, whatever it is. And when I've finished, I might try and find a Curb Your Enthusiasm podcast. I would love to think that somebody watches BoJack 10 years from now, searches on the podcast provider, finds Podcast Horseman, listens to us. And and most of it was recorded in the pandemic. So it's inadvertently a time capsule for the pandemic as well. Period. Yeah. So I'm just really proud of that as a single piece of work. It's not one thing because it's 100+ episodes or whatever it is, 67. I forget.
It doesn't have to be one video. I should have been more specific. Like,
I would say that was it. There was a couple of reviews that I'm particularly proud of, but certainly Podcast Horseman as an individual entity is something that I'm really happy we did it.
To be honest, man, I think that's a beautiful way to end it. So obviously, if you like this video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. If you want to check out any of Michael's work, make sure you tell the people where they can find you, basically, please.
They can find me. So they can find me on Twitter at Michael Hamflett, where I'll always post links to the things I'd love you to see or read or listen to or whatever. The podcast at Podcast Horseman for the BoJack podcast, at WhatCulture WWE for all of our podcasts and for all the other awesome stuff that the WhatCulture guys do. Where you can find all of our podcasts, and just search WhatCulture WWE on your podcast platforms, wherever it is. If you're watching this interview and you've never listened before, we'd love you to give us a try. A lot of people have, and we'd love you to join in and see what a little bit of the fuss is about. So yeah, just WhatCulture WWE. Or I think a final bit of trivia for you. I think I'm the only Michael Hamflett in the world. Hamflett's a rare and stupid surname, and there's not that many of us. But of the few of us that there is, we've all only got this one name. So I think I'm probably the only Michael Hamflett out there. So throw it in your Google machine, as Conrad Thompson would say, and you'll probably find some daft nonsense that I've been waffling on about.
Fair enough. As I say, it's very well worth doing. So, as I say, if you guys like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.